Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, June 11th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The UN Security Council passes a Gaza ceasefire resolution. So on Monday, the UN Security Council adopted a U.S.-drafted ceasefire resolution for Gaza based on a proposal recently outlined by President Biden. 14 members of the 15-member body voted in favor, and Russia abstained. So it sounds good, but things get a little hazy here. The U.S. claims that Israel has accepted the proposal. That's what the U.S. ambassador to the UN was saying, when they were debating this thing, discussing this resolution. But we've seen Netanyahu, he's publicly rejected this proposal, and so have other Israeli officials, and they continue to do that. Even on Monday, they said that they have not agreed to a permanent ceasefire, and that's a big part of this deal or this resolution that was passed. And Russia said that it could not support the resolution because it was not clear what Israel had agreed on and that the language was too vague. So Hamas has welcomed the resolution. Hamas still hasn't given a formal response to that ceasefire proposal that Biden, unveiled a few weeks ago now, but it put out a statement expressing pretty strong support for this resolution. Hamas said that it was ready to, quote, enter into indirect negotiations on the implementation of these principles, end quote. So the resolution outlines a three-phase deal. Again, basically the same thing that Biden outlined. The first phase would be 6-week ceasefire, release of some, an initial hostage and prisoner exchange. Israeli forces would withdraw from population centers of Gaza, and more aid would be sent in, and things like that. And then during that first phase is when they're supposed to negotiate this permanent ceasefire. And again, where things get a little fuzzy is with that wording in the deal, in the resolution. And we've seen Israeli officials say that they thought this deal that it was vague enough that they could agree to it without actually committing to a permanent ceasefire. But then you have Netanyahu saying, no, we're not going to agree to a permanent ceasefire. So it's making Hamas probably want stronger guarantees. But now they're saying that they support this. And Israel's been quiet. As far as I've seen since they passed this resolution, Israel hasn't really said anything about it. So just the fact that you have the U.S. here, but the Biden administration, this is what they've been saying for the past week and a half about whenever Biden came out with this thing, was that, claiming that Israel agreed to this thing, and then you have Netanyahu saying that there's gaps in what Biden presented and what Israel agreed to, and then the U.S. denying that there's any gaps. So just not, doesn't seem very likely that this is going to turn into a deal, but let's hope, that there is some kind of ceasefire. So the resolution calls on Israel and Hamas to implement the deal without delay and without condition. U.S. officials are claiming that Hamas is the only thing standing in the way of a deal, despite what we have seen Netanyahu say. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Egypt meeting with officials on Monday, and he said, quote, my message to governments throughout the region, to people throughout the region is, if you want a ceasefire, press Hamas to say yes, end quote. So U.S. officials told NBC News that the Israeli operation in Nuseirat that killed over 200 Palestinians and freed the 4 Israeli hostages makes a ceasefire deal less likely. And so here you have the U.S. Has been claiming that they're really pushing for a ceasefire, that's what they want to see, yet they gave Israel all that support for that massacre. All right, so the next one here is related. The U.S. is considering talks with Hamas to free 5 U.S. citizens. So NBC News reported on Monday that the Biden administration is considering holding Qatari-mediated talks with Hamas and on a potential unilateral deal not involving Israel to secure the release of 5 American citizens who were captured during the October 7th attack on southern Israel. So there's another 3 American citizens who are believed to have been killed on October 7th, and the families want their remains back. So that would, I guess, be part of the deal as well. It's unclear what the U.S. could offer Hamas. And this is something that U.S. officials even acknowledged to NBC. I don't know what they could put, how they could incentivize Hamas to do this. But I think the fact that the U.S. is considering opening these negotiations is a sign that it does not expect progress with this potential hostage deal that's on the table that the UN Security Council resolution was based on. So Blinken is currently in Israel discussing the deal. He's been bouncing around the region. And I kind of just mentioned some of the same things from that last story. And I know, looking back at the U.S.'s record at the UN Security Council for the past few months, of course, they have used their veto power several times to veto resolutions, some of them that just called for a ceasefire, no conditions, no deal, just ceasefire, and then figure it out. And then there's also, the UN Security Council, if it wasn't for the U.S. Threat to veto something like this, they probably would have, passed a resolution supporting the ICJ's ruling, the International Court of Justice, for Israel to withdraw from Rafah or something like that. But the U.S. is standing in the way of that and supporting this very murky deal. But you never know what could happen. Again, hopefully there's some progress here. I just doubt it, unfortunately. All right, so the next one here, U.S. officials who quit are working together to pressure the U.S. on Gaza. So this article is from CNN, and it says a group of U.S. officials who publicly resigned over the Biden administration's Gaza policy are banding together to support ongoing dissent and put pressure on the government to change course. More than half a dozen people from across the U.S. government have left their jobs in public protest, saying they can no longer work for the administration, and even more have quietly departed. Many of the officials who resigned publicly said they would instead seek to have an impact outside the government. President Joe Biden has faced pressure both abroad and at home over his support for Israel 8 months into the war in Gaza. A conflict that has cost tens of thousands of civilian lives, displaced millions, and brought extreme hunger throughout the enclave. Although the rhetoric from the administration has become harsher with warnings that Israel must do more to protect civilians, the policies have remained largely unchanged. The former officials who resigned publicly, Josh Paul, Harrison Mann, Tariq Kabash, Anel Sheline, Hala Rarit, Lily Greenberg Call, Alex Smith, and Stacey Gilbert. That's quite a few people. They said that they felt their perspectives, expertise, and concerns were not being heeded, and that the administration was willingly ignoring the humanitarian toll caused by Israel's military campaign. They spoke of the damage they felt U.S. policy on the war is having on the country's credibility and a sense that the administration did not fully grasp that impact. All the officials who have resigned publicly and spoke with CNN said they have many colleagues who are still within the government but agree with their decision to leave. Providing support and advice to those colleagues, whether they choose to leave or continue dissent from within, is one of the key reasons that they have come together collectively. Another key reason, they said, is to increase the pressure on the administration to change course. So we've seen these guys. Josh Paul has been very outspoken since he resigned in October. And we've seen a lot of them have been doing interviews, on network news and stuff. And they seem to be getting a lot of attention. So, hopefully it does have some sort of impact and maybe inspire others to do something similar. All right. So the next one here, the World Food Program pauses Gaza aid deliveries through the U.S. Pier. So the UN's World Food Program has paused aid shipments into Gaza through the U.S.-built Pier just days after they resumed, as the project continues to fail to bring any relief to starving Palestinians. So World Food Program Chief Cindy McCain said the deliveries were paused due to safety concerns. The U.S.-built pier was just reconnected to Gaza's coast on Friday after being repaired from damage due to heavy seas. And they said they started aid deliveries again on Saturday, and then they were paused again on Sunday. So this thing just been a complete failure. McCain said, quote, "I'm concerned about the safety of our people. We've stepped back for the moment to make sure we're safe. We're on safe terms and on safe ground before we'll restart. But the rest of the country is operational. We're doing everything we can in the north and the south," end quote. McCain also said that 2 World Food Program warehouses in the area were rocketed, was how she put it, and that a staffer had been injured. She did not share details about the shelling of the warehouses, but it came as Israel, the weekend that Israel launched that huge operation in Nuseirat and just really ramped up the bombings of central Gaza, where these warehouses were located. McCain's comments come amid allegations that Israel used the U.S.-built pier in its operation in the Nuseirat attack that killed over 200 Palestinians and freed 4 Israeli hostages. Video of an Israeli helicopter operating near the pier spread online, and Palestinians said that Israeli special forces entered Nuseirat in an aid truck. The Pentagon acknowledged that Israel operated near the pier, but denied that it or any of the 1,000 U.S. military personnel deployed off the coast were involved. Pentagon spokesman Pat Ryder said, quote, "It was near, but I think that's incidental. Again, the pier, the equipment, the personnel, all supporting that humanitarian effort, had nothing to do with the IDF rescue operation," end quote. So Israel also denied that some of its forces entered Nuseirat in an aid truck, allegations that initially came from eyewitnesses speaking to the media. But on Monday, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, they formally put out a statement accusing Israel of using an aid truck in the attack. So the Palestinian Red Crescent said, quote, "The occupation forces deceived people by disguising themselves under the cover of aid that civilians desperately need amid their suffering from severe food insecurity. This endangers the safety of relief teams," end quote. So other reports said that some of the Israeli commandos entered the camp disguised as displaced Palestinians from Rafah. The fact, if they really did enter with an aid truck, where did they get the aid truck from? And they're operating right by the pier. Seems to be a lot of evidence indicating that, they could have actually, the pier could have had something to do with this. And the pier was just reattached to the coast the day before Israel did launch this operation, and then now it's shut down again, right after. Definitely gives people good reason to ask these questions. All right, so the next one here, at least 5 killed in Israeli attacks as Gaza hospitals appeal for help. This one's from Al Jazeera, just kind of an update on the daily occurrences in Gaza. Israeli attacks in southern Gaza have killed at least 5 Palestinians and injured dozens, the Palestinian news agency Wafa reports, and this was on Monday. Monday's attack on Rafah and Khan Yunis have wounded at least 30 people. The casualties have been brought to the Nasser medical complex, but electricity shutdowns there can make it difficult for the injured to receive treatment, according to the report. Palestinian officials said 40 bodies arrived at hospitals over the previous 24 hours, bringing the total number of people killed in Gaza since October 7th to 37,124, with more than 84,700 injured. Thousands more dead are believed to be buried under the rubble in the devastated enclave. So in Rafah, residents said on Monday that tanks had been thrusting deeper towards the north in the early hours of the morning. They were on the edge of Shabara, one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in the heart of the city. The Qassam Brigades, which is Hamas's armed wing, claimed an attack on Israeli forces, saying that its fighters killed and wounded soldiers. I don't know if we saw anything from the Israeli side. So this continues. All right, so the next one here, Some of Ukraine's F-16s will be stored abroad. So a senior Ukrainian Air Force official said Monday that Ukraine plans to keep some of the Western-provided U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets that it will receive at foreign military bases to protect them from Russian strikes, an arrangement that risks provoking Russian attacks on NATO territory. So they're saying they're going to keep some of these F-16s in NATO countries. This is Brigadier General Serhiy Holubstov. He's the chief of aviation in Ukraine's Air Force. He said, quote, "There are a certain number of aircraft that will be stored at secure air bases outside of Ukraine so that they are not targeted here. And this will be our reserve in case of need for replacement of faulty planes during routine maintenance," end quote. So Russia has warned, Putin has warned that if Ukrainian planes are stored in NATO countries, or if NATO bases are housing Ukrainian planes that are used in the war, then those bases would be legitimate targets. What he's saying, he's making it sound like they would keep them in reserve and then bring those planes in when they lose planes, but still those would be Ukrainian planes that could enter the war at any moment. This was actually last year that Putin said this. He said, quote, "If they are stationed at air bases outside the Ukrainian borders and used in combat, we will have to see how and where to strike the assets used in combat against us. It poses a serious danger of NATO being further drawn into the conflict," end quote. So Putin and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov have also noted that F-16s are capable of carrying nuclear weapons, and Lavrov warned last year that Russia would view them as a nuclear threat. The Netherlands recently announced that it would allow Ukraine to use F-16s it provides in strikes on Russian territory. So big escalation. This whole F-16 plan, one of those things NATO ruled out. We're not going to send planes. No. They did send some MiG fighter jets from Poland and Slovakia, and then this is, giving them American-made jets, training Ukrainian pilots to use them, giving them just another level of support. And Belgium, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Norway have pledged up to 60 F-16s for Ukraine, but none have been delivered so far. The first planes are expected to arrive this summer, and Ukraine may only receive 6 at first due to delays in training pilots. So I know another thing with the F-16s is that they need, very big runways, to kind of specialized runways to handle them. And I don't know if Ukraine really has that many. I think that might be another issue for them. But just another thing that risks, big escalation. All right, so the next one here, Congress says, let Ukraine hit more targets inside Russia with U.S. arms. This article is from Responsible Statecraft by Blaise Malley. U.S. policy toward the war in Ukraine is to escalate rather than to work to calm tensions, if activity on Capitol Hill is any indication. So there were amendments introduced to the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, and one of them states that it is the policy of the U.S. to lift restrictions on Ukraine's ability to strike legitimate targets inside Russia with U.S.-provided weapons. So what exactly legitimate targets means is not specified in the legislative text. And Biden, as far as we know, Biden, he gave Ukraine the green light to use American missiles in Kharkiv. Well, in just over the border in Russia, in that area. That's what they're claiming, in Belgorod, where they launched this offensive from. But here we have members of Congress calling for the restrictions to be lifted, saying, let Ukraine strike anywhere in Russia. And, they just gave them the ATACMS missiles that have a range of up to 200 miles. That's deep inside Russia that those things can hit. And there's pressure, now that Biden gave Ukraine the green light for the strikes near Kharkiv, they're asking for the next thing. Let them loose. Let them, use the weapons anywhere. And then there's another amendment, a competing amendment offered by Representative Paul Gosar, Republican from Arizona, that would prohibit the use of weapons provided to Ukraine for the purpose of striking targets within Russia. but that amendment has no co-sponsors. Unfortunately, that position is less popular than the World War III position. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. wants to create a hellscape if China attacks Taiwan. So the U.S. military is planning to create a hellscape of drones in the Taiwan Strait if China moves to attack Taiwan. The top U.S. military commander in the region has told the Washington Post. So Admiral Samuel Paparo, he's the head of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. He told Washington Post columnist Josh Rogan that the idea would be to send thousands of drones, unmanned submarines, and drone boats into the strait to buy time for the U.S. and Taiwan to prepare a defense of the island. He said, quote, "I want to turn the Taiwan Strait into an unmanned hellscape using a number of classified capabilities so that I can make their lives utterly miserable for a month, which buys me the time for the rest of everything," end quote. So a very provocative thing for the U.S. military commander, the highest level U.S. he's the head of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. He's the top dog over there in the Asia Pacific in the U.S. military, and he's saying he wants to turn the Taiwan Strait into a hellscape for China if they move on Taiwan. So the U.S. has taken steps in this direction of developing swarms of drones for a future war with China. Last year, Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks outlined a plan to deploy thousands of drones controlled by artificial intelligence, known as the Replicator Initiative. She said, quote, "With Replicator, we're beginning with all-domain attritable autonomy, or ADA2, to help us overcome China's advantage in mass. More ships, more missiles, more forces," end quote. And she said this at a conference in September 2023, and that she said the U.S. plans to deploy the drones at a scale of multiple thousands in multiple domains within the next 18 to 24 months. So again, she said that almost a year ago, September 2023. So Paparo framed the plan as necessary to deter China from attacking Taiwan, but as I'm always going on about, the U.S. military buildup in this region, the new U.S. support for Taiwan, all it is doing is raising tensions and making conflict seem more likely, especially when you have U.S. military leaders openly talking about this, the fact that they are planning for war with China, direct war with China, even though they have nukes. Doesn't seem to be factored into the calculations. And you listen to this language that he uses when he talks about this. He said, quote, "The region has got two choices. The first is that they can submit and as an end result give up some of their freedoms, or they can arm to the teeth. Both cases have direct implications to the security, the freedom, and the well-being of citizens of the United States of America," end quote. So telling Asia, East Asia, that it has to make a choice between the U.S. and China. I mean, how does China take this stuff? That's just going to make them build more ships and expand their military more. It's just it's just not good, the way that they talk about China. All right, so the next one here, Israeli missile strikes kill 5 on the Lebanon-Syria border. So this article is from Jason Ditz. Israeli forces carried out a series of missile strikes targeting a convoy of tankers crossing the Syrian border into Lebanon, killing at least 5 people and wounding 5 others. 3 of the slain were reportedly Syrian members of Hezbollah. Israel fired 9 missiles at the convoy, causing substantial damage and casualties, both among those ferrying the tankers across the border and bystanders. Early reports are that the 2 non-Hezbollah slain in the strike were Lebanese. So this is, again, in northeast Lebanon along the border with Syria. So the strikes in Lebanon continue. All right, the next story here, the U.S. begins its withdrawal from Niger. So U.S. Africa Command announced on Saturday that it has begun the process of withdrawing military assets from Niger as the U.S. has a September 15th deadline to get out of the country. AFRICOM said in a joint statement with Niger's military, quote, "The U.S. Department of Defense and the Nigerian Ministry of National Defense of the Republic of Niger announced that the withdrawal of U.S. forces and assets from Niger has progressed from initial preparation to redeployment. The significant transition began with the departure of a U.S. Air Force C-17 Globemaster III from Air Base 101 in Niamey on June 7th, 2024, end quote. So the U.S. has about 1,000 military personnel to remove from two bases in the country, Air Base 101 and Air Base 201. Air Base 201 is the big drone base, the big expensive drone base that the U.S. did not want to give up, but it looks like they're on their way out. And the American troops could be redeployed elsewhere in Africa. I've seen U.S. military officials say that. Of course, they can't just bring them home. But AFRICOM did say that some of them have already redeployed from Niger to their home stations. So the U.S. finally began this withdrawal months after Niger asked for the U.S. to leave. We know why, because, again, that big drone base, this is a big foothold for the U.S. in the region. They didn't want to give it up. And then we had a whistleblower come out and say the U.S. is creating this delusion that they're wanted in Niger. There was no chance of them negotiating a deal to stay, yet they stayed and put U.S. troops in danger in the meantime. But now the withdrawal's underway, so hopefully it's completed by September 15th and everything goes smoothly. And just hopefully they bring them all home. All right, so that is it. I left the one up yesterday about the U.S. and British airstrikes killing 16 civilians in Yemen because that's just a story that I think has gone so unnoticed. Go check out our Viewpoints, one from Ramsey Baroud, Beyond Two-State Solution, Why Recognizing the State of Palestine is Important. One from Norman Solomon, How Daniel Ellsberg's Moral Power Remains Alive. One from Peter Van Buren, Will the First Amendment Save Assange? One from Ryan McMacken, Justin Raimondo, How Conservatives Flipped on Palestine During the Cold War. So this is a post from Ryan at the Mises Institute about Justin Raimondo, who, for those who don't know, he was a co-founder of antiwar.com in 95, and he was a columnist for many years. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2019. I'm sure most of you are aware of that, but it's an interesting talk that he gave in 2014 because Justin's really was a historian of like the old right, the conservative movement in the U.S. And it's interesting. He discusses how the conservative movement tended to side with the Palestinians in the 1940s. And even as late as 1956, National Review featured a column referring to the state of Israel as the first racist state in modern history. Raimondo recounts how famously conservative publisher Henry Regnery published a whole series of books reporting on the dispossession of the Palestinian people. So it's interesting, an interesting talk from Justin, again, from 2014, if you want to check that out. But that is it for me for today. Just another reminder that at the end of this week, I'm going on vacation, going to Australia for 2 weeks. So there will be no show. Antiwar.com will be updated as usual. Listen to Kyle Angelone's great show, Conflicts of Interest. He goes over lots of the same news, and he has great analysis over there. And he's going to be doing probably a lot of more writing for antiwar.com while I'm out. So anyway, support this show by liking, sharing, subscribing. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Follow us on social media, Instagram, on X, and all that stuff. I will be back tomorrow with some more news for you. Thanks for listening.